All right, we're back on with the second in a series of interviews with coaches. Hopefully we'll give you some information that you'll be able to use yourself. We stopped when we were both talking about the coaches that were on the staff with the three of us being brothers. And then we also mentioned that my two sons played for us, and then both of them actually came back and coached with us. So, you know, a lot of talk out there. I know the government has made a rule on a lot of places that you can't have nepotism, and I'd just like to get the view of Steve and Dale on if they have that ever even entered their mind, or what they thought, or if it played into another part. Well, let Dale start.
I don't think anything about nepotism. It's kind of the neat thing about it. Me being the oldest, of course, some people would say, well, didn't you have a problem letting your brother be in charge? There was nothing as far as, yes, he was the leader, but as far as charge, every one of us had a job to do, and we tried to do it to the best of our abilities, and not only for ourselves, but for the kids, so that they would be able to see. And does that mean that there was never a moment of disagreement? Well, no. I mean, you don't call marriage nepotism, and there's all kinds of disagreements in those things, but no. And I never felt that. I don't know that, you know, you'd have to answer that, whether you felt that any of us ever overstepped our bounds, or how you brought us back into bounds. But Steve, you coached longer with Gary than I did. I didn't have that same opportunity, so you would know more than I would.
I think the biggest thing about it, well, nepotism maybe in the workplace, as far as getting promotions and stuff, can be harmful. But in this coaching, the way I looked at it is, I didn't have any ambitions to go anywhere else. I don't think Dale had any ambitions to go anywhere else. We knew Gary was the head coach. I knew that Gary knew a million times more than what I knew. I was feeding off him and the other coaches, but I didn't have any ambition to improve my resume and become a head coach somewhere. I was perfectly happy working with my brother, and I wish I could have even stayed until he finally quit, gave it up. But no, I think as brothers, we had a long life of arguing and a long life of getting together, but the one thing you don't do with brothers is somebody else doesn't say anything bad about them. So we always had each other's backs, and I think it worked out for the best. And even Coach Fred, who had a vast knowledge of our defense, and pretty much Gary as a head coach would set the plan, but Fred ran the major part of the defense that I had to work into with the secondary. But Fred loved where he was. He loved the opportunity that my brother gave him, and we loved having him. I mean, he's my best friend, so it would be hard. I think it would be a lot harder, me taking criticism from someone else that I might not respect as much.
Yeah, two real quick stories. Both of them actually deal with Steve, but when we were a little younger, we are 4 years apart. I'm older by 4 years, and well, we had a little disagreement one day when he stole my shoelace out of my shoe.
We weren't a rich family.
We were not a rich family, no. But that story goes around a lot about how bad it was, you know. But he's right. I think that the key is, we were brought up by my father and my mother that you are there for the good of the cause. And you're going to do whatever you can to make that the best situation you can, and that's how we were. And I think it was Dale was right. There were times when we were in the office, the coach's office, and the kids wondered if we were going to have to call an ambulance and have somebody take it out of there, because we were arguing back and forth. But I think that was part of the coolness of the whole thing, is that we could argue, everybody could make their point. We then had to come to a conclusion. Now, sometimes that conclusion was concluded on only by me,
right,
you know, but it was because,
yeah,
because I was the guy that was having my name put out there, basically, as to, you know, what was happening
school
and things through the school and things like that. But when the doors opened, it was everybody patting everybody on the back, and okay, let's go out there and let's do the best thing that we can. So I never thought of nepotism. You know, as a head coach, it was not something that I looked at, and I knew that my brothers were going to do as much, if not more, than I was to make us succeed. And I don't think you could ask for coaches that are any better than that.
No.
There's no doubt about it. So I just wanted to put that one to rest a little bit, and make sure that everybody was on the same page with respect to that. Now we're here for a particular reason on Huddle Up Coaches, and that's to help other coaches. So I always want to ask, what advice would you give a young coach that's starting out? I mean, Steve, definitely in your situation, you hadn't really even experienced any kind of coaching, I don't think.
No,
Had you coached anything?
No.
And it's definitely not football and things. So, you know, there's going to be a lot of kids out there that might be the same way. And I do want to preface this like I did with Fred and say, I think everybody that gets into coaching has, you know, X's and O's that they like or prefer or whatever the case may be, but it's the other stuff. What advice could you give, if any?
It doesn't matter. Don't overlook a kid because he might be smaller than you think or what other people think. That he might not have all the talent that you're looking for. Don't go into the hallways to find the big kid that really doesn't want to be there. If you have to convince him to come out to football, and you have to pressure him every week to come out to football because you want that 300 pounds, 6'4", and you start making special allowances for them, it's going to destroy the rest of the team. Take the kids that want to be there, want to learn, and will listen to what you have to say and buy into your strategy. If they're not going to buy in, and no one's a prima donna. You can't have a prima donna, in our opinion. I know there's a lot of guys out there that have star quarterbacks and all that's great. And there are, we did too, but they got away with nothing. Everybody was treated the same. And I want to preface that on, my brother had 2 sons that played on our teams at different times. And if you think that because he was the son of the head coach, that he was going to get preferred service, that didn't happen. It was harder. Our father always taught us to be harder on our friends and family than you would anyone else because they're a reflection of you. So those kids worked even harder, and I can only say that just take the kids that want to learn, and they'll turn out to be much better than you ever imagined.
I definitely, before we get Dale a chance there, I definitely want to say that, you know, in 1988 we had an unbelievable group of seniors. I want to say we only had 25 kids on the team, and I want to say 19 of them were seniors,
yep.
And they were good. David Trombetta, one of the finest quarterbacks, actually finest players that we had, Jimmy Murchek, Frankie Fron. I mean, we could go on with the list that goes forever, you know, but they were an outstanding team. But in 1989, we came back and we did not have one player that had ever played a position that they were going to play for us that year. And it was tough. We went 1-8. We went 1-8. Yeah, it was very, very difficult. And after that year, we got together. I was with Steve and Fred, and I sat down and I told them, okay, here's my idea. My idea is I don't care how many kids we have. We're not going to look for quantity. We want to look for quality. And I'm going to start a conditioning program, and I gave them the idea of the conditioning program that we're going to do. And I said I want everybody to be on the same page, because if they don't go through this conditioning program, then they're not going to be part of the team. And they said, okay. They were all for it. I mean, neither one of them said, well, we need to have 60 kids on our team. No. In fact, Steve has made the comment a few times, I don't know what I would do as a coach if I had 70 kids on the team.
If I would have had 10 backfield guys, I would have been struggling with, am I giving this guy enough time? But I didn't have to worry about that, because our guys went both ways most of the time. Yep. At least some part of them did, position-wise. But yeah.
Dale, how about you?
Well, I think with young coaches, the thing is that they all have this attitude, I've got to be a super, or looking, like you said earlier, to increase their resume. And so then you become a one-way coach. You don't study everything out, and that's one thing I can say about our coaches meetings. Everyone had an input, everyone had an opportunity to share, because we all wanted to be better. How can we do this better? If we had a back that wasn't really accomplishing what we thought, we could talk to one another and say, what do we need to do? How do we need to align this in order to get the full potential out of this player? Many coaches come in with they've learned one offense, and they want to stay with that one offense. And to some degree that works. The problem is if you don't have the athletes to run that one, then you're going to be limited for that season. If someone would have told us we were going to have to run the wishbone at Clark, we would have been decimated right away, because we didn't have the personnel to do that. And that's one thing I liked, is that we were able to change offenses so many times as far as the look. It wasn't the scheme, but the look looked so much different. I would tell young coaches, don't count anything out. Don't think the kids are going to follow you just because you're the head coach. You've got to do it by example. You've got to put the time in.
Yeah.
You've got to make them feel proud that they play on this field. I mean, I remember coming in and you making them clean their lockers out and make sure that it didn't smell like a rat's nest or whatever, and causing the kids to take hold of leadership. The older seniors could tell the freshmen or the sophomore, look, we don't do that here. And that was very important to me. And so, you know, cause that leadership as a young coach to go into your staff and into your kids.
We're talking about pride before a little bit, just to backtrack a little bit. The thing I'm proudest about that I really had nothing to do with is Gary instituted a pass-fail sheet that went around to all the teachers. And in 10 years, we never lost a kid to grades. And it wasn't because Gary went to the teachers and said, we need to pass so-and-so because he's the star player. It's because every Monday they had to take a sheet around to every teacher and get a yes or no on if he's passing, failing, or on the line. And then the only part I had in that is after practice every day, the players that got a sheet and the players that decided to stay with their team, then we had a tutoring hour where Gary and Dale and some of the other coaches that are really smart helped these guys along, and I was there for moral support. But never losing a kid to grades is probably one of the proudest things being involved in a high school that I ever had.
Yeah, and I would just want to add one thing. I think we might have mentioned this in the Fred interview also, but I think that's more than just the one-fold about, you know, for us, because you don't want to lose players. It just is really tough. But more important to that is, you know, your school, your teachers, your other students buy into the program.
They don't see the favoritism.
Yeah, they understand how hard it is for those kids to be out there with us. They're not getting any special treatment, so they start to come to games more. We had great attendance,
huge.
You know, when we were there, especially by teachers. And there was more than one teacher that would come down to me and say, you know, you made my day today. And I'd say, really, how did that happen? And they would say, well, I had one of your football players that was going to start to act up a little bit, and all I did was look at him and say, do we need to walk down to Coach Ridgely's office? And they would just shut up immediately and do what they were supposed to do. So it kind of, they bought into it. And then in turn, there's no doubt, I'm not stupid enough to think that you don't get a little bit of favoritism from teachers in that case. Because if a kid is doing what he's supposed to do and acting bright and working hard, they're going to give them that little bump up maybe that they need.
Maybe,
you know.
but I don't know.
Yeah,
they worked awful hard at it.
They absolutely did work extremely hard.
The good part about that too, Gary, is because they knew you instituted, as Steve said, this checklist. If they saw one of your athletes starting to slip before the checklist, they would come and mention, not to get that child in trouble, because they knew the importance that we put on the educational process, and that they wanted that kid to succeed just as much, because the teachers bought into the athletic program. They bought into the football program because they knew that you were going to back that teacher.
Well, compare 1988 fans, how many fans we'd get in 1988 versus 1990.
Yeah.
And then as it went on, the people that traveled with us, hundreds of miles to South Bend, to Indianapolis, and we'd have more fans than the home team had.
It was pretty impressive when we went down to Indianapolis in 1994 to play what was eventually, I think, the state finalists in Indianapolis Cathedral. And I looked behind us on the sidelines, and who's standing there but the mayor of Hammond.
Right.
You know, he had drove down there with a couple of his buddies, and they were standing on the sidelines. I mean, they weren't, you know, trying to get involved in anything. They were They were watching to see what was going on.
Right, Dwayne Delo. It was important to him to push the kids, and that's why he gave me time off.
Yeah,
gave Fred time off, not time off, but allowed us to move our stuff around. And probably through coaching is how I got my bump up to assistant chief, and Fred got bumped up to chief. He saw the involvement in Hammond and the kids, but going back to, you know, wanting to learn, you know, as a defensive coach, I'm sure Dale feels the same way. I was happy. None of the teams we played ran the veer. We ran the veer, and I was happy that we didn't have to defend against the veer.
We're going to take a little quick break here, and then we'll come back for the third and final phase of this interview.